everyone, and a very warm welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, co-hosted by ISO and BSI, following the launch yesterday of the new edition of ISO 14001-2026 Environmental Management Systems. My name is Katie Clift. I'm Head of Public Relations at ISO, and I will be moderating today's session. Very glad that you've tuned in from wherever in the world you're tuning in from. We have a lot to get through, a very full agenda and a great session to take you through today. So we're very excited to be jumping into this webinar full on mode. But we will start with some housekeeping, just so you're aware of the different points. There's a few different items on this slide that you can read through. The main things to realize is that the session is being recorded. You will be shared a copy afterwards, so no need to worry about that. We do want to thank you as well for submitting your questions in advance via registration. We received a number of different questions that we will proceed to answer in a Q&A at the end of the session. But as we go live today, if any question that comes to mind, you might hear an insight, you might have additional Q&As for our panelists and speakers, we welcome you to pop them in the top right-hand corner. You'll see the chat function, the Q&A, so you can write your questions in live time, and we'll see how many we can get to at the end of the session today. So please be aware of that. As I mentioned, we have a very full agenda, and there's some really great practical tips here before we jump into that agenda, and we welcome our speakers. So yeah, make sure that you make use of all the different practical tools. You can zoom in, you can take screenshots and photos. There's a lot of information we'll be sharing with you today. And actually today is really about helping you understand what the new edition of ISO 14001 means in practice. So not just what has changed, but what it enables. And you're going to hear today directly from experts involved in its development, as well as organizations applying the standard in real world contexts. So there's a lot of practical information coming your way today. As you'll see, this is our first slide of the agenda. We're going to start with opening remarks from BSI and ISO, followed by a deep dive into the updates in ISO 14001-2026. We'll get practical insights from implementation and procurement, perspectives on conformity assessment and adoption, real world impact stories, and we'll take a broader look at the ISO 14000 family and related standards. We will then close with the live Q&A and final reflections. So this is slide 1 of the agenda. If we quickly flip to slide 2, you'll see that we have about 10 speakers and very in-depth, thorough presentations to walk you through today. So I know you're going to walk away with a lot of insight, a lot of great information via this webinar, and we're very excited to get started. As a reminder, please put your questions in that Q&A box anytime as we proceed through the different presentations and we hear from all the speakers. So with that, we might begin. So we will start with our opening remarks with a video from Susan Taylor-Martin, Chief Executive of BSI.
Good afternoon. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person today because today is an important occasion, the launch of BSEN ISO 14001-2026, the latest version of the world's leading environmental management system standard. Now this year, BSI celebrates 125 years of shaping trust, enabling innovation and building confidence. And this year also marks the 30th anniversary of ISO 14001. So today isn't simply the publication of the latest version of the standard. I think it's a moment to reflect on 3 decades of global environmental progress enabled by ISO 14001. 30 years ago, ISO 14001 fundamentally changed how organizations approached environmental responsibility. It created a shared global framework, a common language, a systemic way to translate environmental ambition into operational reality. And I can say that we hold ISO 14000 certification ourselves, and we don't ask our clients to do what we're not prepared to do, so that matters to us. Over the past 3 decades, it's become one of the most widely adopted environmental management frameworks in the world. And today, more than 500,000 ISO 14001 certifications are in place across 180 countries. And that represents hundreds of thousands of organizations across industries, geographies, supply chains, choosing to manage their environmental impacts in a structured, credible, and measurable way. The world we operate in today is more global, more digital, more complex, and environmental risks are increasingly interconnected. Climate impacts are accelerating, we know that. Biodiversity loss is intensifying. Stakeholder expectations are rising, and the demand for transparency has never been greater, and the need for action has never been more acute. Organizations are also operating under increasing scrutiny from investors, regulators, customers, communities, all of whom want to see credible, verifiable evidence of environmental action. It's not about ambition, it's not fine words, it's evidence. This 2026 update reflects a global response to these evolving challenges. It strengthens governance and decision-making, and it reinforces organizational resilience. It aligns much more clearly with emerging priorities, including natural capital, biodiversity, and climate adaptation. This is not a routine update. It is a major step forward designed for the realities of our time and for the expectations organizations will face in the years ahead. At BSI, our purpose is clear: create impact for a fair society and sustainable world. And obviously, environmental stewardship sits at the very heart of that. A sustainable world depends on organizations that manage their environmental impacts consistently and strategically and transparently. And a fair society depends on protecting resources and ecosystems for future generations while enabling economic progress today. For 125 years, standards have been the mechanism through which ambition becomes action and goals become reality. In safety, in quality, in innovation, and increasingly in sustainability. Standards create alignment across borders, they build trust between organizations and stakeholders, and they can turn complex global challenges into structured, actionable frameworks. ISO 14001 is one of the clearest examples of that power in practice. BSI was a founding member of ISO, and indeed ISO 14001 started life as a British standard BS 7750. Our standards now underpin more than 80% of global trade, not as background infrastructure, but as the active mechanism through which innovation can be scaled, new markets can be accessed, and supply chains can be activated, all because trust is built using standards. The development of this edition of 14001 was a genuinely collective endeavour. Environmental challenges do not respect borders, and solutions can't either. ISO 14001 is founded on international consensus, shared expertise, shared responsibility, and shared ambition. And that collective approach is more important now than ever. The next chapter of ISO 14001 will help organizations strengthen governance, enhance resilience, and demonstrate credible, measurable environmental impact. It gives leaders the tools to embed environmental thinking into strategy and to anticipate rather than react, and to demonstrate real accountability to those who depend on them. But its value will only be realized when organizations choose to use it with genuine intent, because certification is a starting point, it's not a destination. The goal is not compliance, it's leadership. So as we mark today's milestone, I want to encourage every organization here to see this not just as a new standard to meet, but as an opportunity to raise the bar. Thank you for being part of this, and thank you for your commitment to creating impact for a fair society and sustainable world.
Thank you very much to Susan for kicking us off with a great video. We will now continue our opening remarks, and I'm pleased to welcome Noelia Garcia-Nebra, Head of Sustainability and Partnerships at ISO, to continue our opening remarks. Noelia, over to you.
Thank you so much, Katie, and good day, everyone, and welcome. I'm Noelia Garcia-Nebra, Head of Sustainability and Partnerships at ISO, and it's a real pleasure to have you with us today. This webinar marks an important moment, not only for ISO 14001, but for the environmental management more broadly. What we are seeing globally is a clear shift. Environmental sustainability is no longer a peripheral concern. It is now central to how organizations operate, how they create value, and how they build resilience for the future. At ISO, environmental sustainability has been a core part of our mission for long. Through international standards, we provide practical, globally trusted frameworks that help organizations translate environmental responsibility into consistent, effective action across sectors, across borders, and throughout supply chains. ISO 14001 has played a central role in this for many years. It helps organizations move from intention to implementation, embedding environmental management into everyday operations and decision-making. Today's session will focus on the new edition of ISO 14001, its benefits and key updates, but also on how it fits within the broader ISO's portfolio. Environmental challenges are interconnected. ISO standards reflect this through complementary work on areas such as biodiversity, climate adaptation, or resource efficiency. Together, they support a more cohesive and integrated approach to sustainability. The context in which organizations operate continues to evolve. Climate change, biodiversity loss, pressure on natural resources, these are no longer distant risks. They are immediate and systematic challenges. At the same time, expectations from regulators, investors, customers, and society at large are continuing to rise. ISO standards are reviewed regularly to remain relevant and effective. The 2026 edition of ISO 14001 responds directly to this changing landscape. It builds on trusted global foundations while offering greater clarity, improved usability, and stronger alignment with today's environmental priorities. The intention was not to reinvent the standard, but to refine and strengthen it, making it easier to understand, implement, and integrate into broader management systems. Advancing sustainability is a shared effort across ISO, our members, and the global community of organizations that use standards in practice. We hope today's session provides useful insights and practical guidance as you continue your work. Thank you so much. Katie, back to you. Thank you.
Fantastic, Noelia, thank you. And thank you to Susan and Noelia for both setting the scene so clearly with those opening remarks. We're now going to move into the detail of the new edition of ISO 14001, what's changed, and importantly, what that means in practice for organizations. Now, I'm very pleased to introduce our next speakers from ISO TC207 SC1, which is the technical committee that led the development of the standard. So we have Amarjit Kaur, ISO TC207 SC1 technical expert and chair of Malaysia's National Mirror Committee for EMS, also director of SHMC, welcome. And Andrew Marlowe, ISO TC207 SC1 technical expert, member of BSI National Mirror Committee for EMS, and managing director of One Planet Solutions. Great to have you both with us, and I'll hand over to you first, Amarjit.
Right, thank you, Katie, for that introduction. And good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everybody. I'm here in Malaysia, so it is a good evening to others that are in this part of the world. I'm very happy and proud to participate in this session and to talk to you about ISO 14001 2026. But I will be, there'll also be contribution from Andrew as well on the new standard. So I will start off the session basically looking at the bigger picture, more strategic implications and benefits of the standard, and then I'll pass it over to Andrew to talk about the details. Can I have the next slide, please? So everybody's probably wondering what's changed. Well, to answer that, I suppose you'll have to pick up the standard and read it, and then you'll find out what has changed in detail. But let me just explain to you again from the big picture what has been enhanced. So obviously, there has been some enhancement in the requirements related to context. There has been improved alignment with the harmonized structure. And the working group actually put a lot of effort and time into making sure the Annex A, which is the guidance to the standard, has been enhanced. So I'll go through these, and obviously, like I mentioned earlier on, Andrew would probably go into the details as well. Can I have the next slide, please? So why does this matter? Those changes, why it makes a difference? And the earlier speakers have already mentioned that obviously we are facing a lot of pressures from things like climate change, biodiversity loss, ecosystem degradation, and so on and so forth. And of course, stakeholders are expecting more transparency, accountability, actions as well from the corporate sector and every organization. There's an expectation that corporate behavior changes, in terms of making sure that the pressures are being addressed, not only by governments, but also the business sector as well. So obviously, the implications are organizations will have to make sure that you understand your context better, you have better systems in place to manage your impacts, risks, and opportunities. Next slide, please. So I think many of you have seen these. This is the context that we are working within now, as a business, as even an SME or even a large organization. There are so many expectations out there. There are regulations out there. There are disclosure requirements and whatnot. So 14,001, 2026, when it has been in the revision, has been aimed at trying to help organizations deal with this, multitude of pressures out there that are faced by organizations. Next, please. And even in terms of acquiring funding and investment, we all know that investors now look at organization sustainability performance. And if you look around, even agencies or rating agencies are looking at environmental performance. And I've given you an example of S&P Global's assessment where ISO 14001 is specifically mentioned. In addition, even the other schemes like EcoVadis mentions ISO 14001. So that just means that ISO 14001 has a very important role now in terms of supporting sustainability and also to assist organizations with sourcing funding. Next, please. So it's no longer just a compliance focused standard. It never was, but it ceases to be that. Only now, it now has become a tool, or something that can enable an organization to be able to understand its environmental context and how impacts connect under the umbrella of sustainability. Of course, impacts across the value chain, understanding risks and opportunities resulting from this, and look at environmental performance in a more strategic point of view. It has the standard allows organizations actually to look at environmental management systems and performance as well at a more strategic level. Next, please. So example, how 14,001 fits into all of this. I spoke about disclosure requirements. In order to meet disclosure requirements, due diligence expectations, obviously an organization will be required to understand risks, impacts, and required to churn out information on performance. So this is where 14,001 becomes a good tool to help. In fact, now when you need to think about your context, you need to seriously think about your environmental conditions, identify your aspects. It applies a risk-based approach, and also it allows you to identify performance results and help to communicate. So this fits in very well with the expectations that are out there on disclosures and due diligence. Next, please. So I'm going to just touch on a few of these, and I'll leave Andrew to touch on some of these as well. Let's talk about environmental conditions. As far as context is concerned, you've always had to determine issues that are important. Now, the standard actually mentions on the examples of environmental conditions that you should be considering when you think about the context and designing your EMS. And the examples given are like pollution, natural resource availability, climate change, biodiversity, and these are all current and I believe future issues that need to be taken into account in any organization's environmental management system. Next, please. Better alignment with harmonized structure. Obviously, this is to help organizations who want to put in place integrated management systems so you get to save resources, but I'll get Andrew to elaborate on this. Next, please. And Annex A, all I want to say is that a lot of effort has been put into this, and everyone in the working group and SC1 as well. Our message to everyone is to make sure that you read Annex A, the guidance itself, because there's a lot of information in there to help you. Again, Andrew would elaborate on this a little bit more. Keep going. Next, please. Life cycle perspective has always been there, but it has been enhanced. There's more information, more explanation on life cycle perspective. And we all know in an EMS, this is very important because in an organization, when you're setting up an EMS, you need to make sure that you're not shifting impacts in other parts of your value chain. So that's why taking a life cycle perspective is vital in terms of designing your EMS and thinking about your environmental impacts. And this has been enhanced with more examples provided in the annex. Next, please. Again, there's more improvement in the information provided in Annex A, and I will leave Andrew to talk about this. Next, please. So what does this mean for organization? Obviously, for SMEs, let's start with SMEs. The standard provides a structured but flexible framework because there's not much expectation for organization to come up with tons and tons of documentation. It allows organizations to decide what documentation you need. And of course, as an SME, it allows you to support customer requirements, supply chain expectations. And also it's like the first step. It will help you to take on board larger ESG matters as well. And of course, for larger organizations, it allows you to look at environmental performance as part of your risk management as well, helps you with disclosures, avoid duplication in terms of being able to integrate management system, and of course, helps to strengthen governance and consistency. Next, please. So these are some of the key takeaways, but I'll get Andrew to continue on and he can explain a bit more about the key takeaways. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Amarjit, for your insight into the strategic background of the revision process. My presentation will take that strategic overview given by Amarjit and drill down into the changes that have been made to support the key objectives of the revision. But before we look at some examples of the revision, it is important to say over the next 5 minutes or so, I will cover samples of the issues that I think are important to note and for you to consider in the revision process. However, there may be other examples not covered in this presentation, so do consider your own gap analysis between your current environmental management system and the requirements of the new edition of ISO 14001-2026. So, for example, in my first slide, I will look at the requirements of the harmonized structure and its role in the revision process. We should note that this structure, the harmonized structure, forms the foundation for all management system standards, such as ISO 9001 for quality management and ISO 45001 for health and safety management, as well as for ISO 14001 and a whole host of other management system standards. So if you're an organization that has more than one management system standard, then it will help in implementing the similar arrangements in each of those standards into a more integrated management system. So there is already a benefit of the harmonized structure. For the new edition, there are changes in clause 3 in the terms and definitions, and most notably to highlight a combined term risk and opportunities, as opposed to the term risk that was in the 2015 edition. And that links to a new clause 6.1.4, which helps to fully implement the risk and opportunity structure within your environmental management system. Additionally, there's a new definition of policy to align more closely with the Quality Management System Standard 9001. Change management is brought to your attention as a new clause on the planning of change in clause 6.3, which will assist organisations to build processes to be more effective in their response to change, and that can be business change or it can be environmental changes. In line with quality management systems, the term outsourced is replaced by externally provided products, service and processes to provide a greater focus on contractors and others that can support the organisation's environmental management system. Internal audit is given a revision with a requirement to document audit programme and the audit objectives. And this has the opportunity to provide an additional focus on the role of internal audit. My final example on this slide is the influence of the harmonised structure from the new edition in respect to management review, where greater clarity is given by splitting the requirements into general management review inputs and management review results. So giving greater clarity to those processes that can drive the environmental management system from a top management perspective downwards. Within my next slide, we can look at the changes that enhance usability of the new edition. There is greater clarification on risk and opportunities, which is often confused with only relating to environmental aspects and impacts. But here it allows for a greater strategic approach to the environmental management system. As hinted earlier, there are reordering of clauses to provide greater linkage between requirements, and these linkages are highlighted within the requirements and the accompanying notes to make it a more usable standard in the flow for the user to be able to understand the requirements and how they relate to each other. One highlighted issue for users was they wanted greater clarity on concepts like the life cycle perspective, which Amarjit mentioned during her presentation, and they welcomed an opportunity for more information to enable them to more effectively embed life cycle perspective within their organisations. Accordingly, a note to the requirements and greater guidance is given in Annex A of 14,001/2026. And finally, previously separate clauses on improvement and continual improvement have been merged to provide a greater focus on these twin issues that are designed to improve the performance of the environmental management system. My final slide recognises the importance of Annex A, as Amarjit mentioned during her presentation, which has been comprehensively revised to provide greater clarity to concepts such as leadership, organisational culture, environmental responsibility, and employee engagement, bringing together targeted guidance for users new to the ISO 14001 standard or those refreshing their existing environmental management system. There is much that Annex A can provide to users of 14001. So do consider implementing not only the clause requirements, but also using the wealth of information that Annex A provides. This will help your organisation to truly gain the optimal benefits for your environmental management system based on ISO 14001-2026 by aligning your organisation's strategy and integrating your environmental management system requirements into your business processes. So I appreciate that is a short presentation, and there are many other opportunities to delve into the contents of the new standard. But for now, I thank you for the opportunity to present the highlights from the revision of 14001 to the 2026 edition. And I will now pass you back to Katie. Thank you.
Fantastic, Andrew. Thank you so much. And thank you to Andrew and Amajit together for that comprehensive presentation, all the detail in the changes to the standard and what they mean very concretely. That was fantastic. We're now going to shift from the what to the how, and we'll look at how ISO 14001 is being applied in practice, specifically in procurement. So this is ISO 14001 in procurement, a success story. We welcome James Scusa, Director of Environment at Metrolinx. James, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you to ISO and BSI for organizing this event today. I'm James Scusa, Director of Environment for Metrolinx in Toronto, Canada. It amazes me to see the magnitude of this event today with people tuning in from all across the globe, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to speak to you here, albeit briefly, but I hope to cover off a major success for our organization with the help of ISO 14001. My contact information is available at the end of the presentation should there be any reason to connect after today. So Metrolinx, previously under the name of Go Transit, was established in Toronto, Canada in 1967 as Canada's first regional public transit rail system servicing 2.5 million riders per year. As you can see in our vision, values, and our mission to champion, develop, and implement an integrated transportation system that enhances prosperity, sustainability, and quality of life, we take the matter of sustainability very seriously, and it's a pillar under which we operate. Today, we service over 70 million riders annually across our bus, rail, and light rail rapid transit transportation systems, all within the Greater Toronto Area. We anticipate an estimated 200 million riders per year by 2055. We're currently in the midst of a major transit expansion initiative, which has seen substantial infrastructure upgrades and significant transit construction projects to expand current services and increase service frequency. Part of that plan has already invested $12 billion to date, and is expected to remove an estimated 145,000 cars off the road each and every day. As part of this plan, we also expect to electrify over 600 kilometers of rail track over the coming years, which will contribute to our corporate goals around GHG reduction of our operations. Now, with all these major expansion projects comes dozens of partnerships with key large-scale constructors, working alliances, engineering firms, etc., through which we've embedded ISO 14001 requirements into standard contract language. Can move on to the next slide, please. So Metrolinx utilizes various schedules that make up project agreements for construction and expansion projects. There's a dedicated environmental schedule that clearly defines the environmental requirements for the project, most notably a requirement for the project to implement and maintain an EMS conforming to the ISO 14001 standard. Contractors on these projects are required to have various environmental staff to support the needs of the EMS. This can fluctuate based on the project size, perceived environmental risks, etc. Above and beyond the obvious requirement of complying to all environmental regulations, most projects include stipulations around soil and water contamination, archaeological or cultural heritage assessments, air quality, noise and vibration management, and additional considerations around endangered species, preservation of the natural environment, as well as greenhouse gas inventories and climate resiliency assessments. Regular reporting, usually monthly, quarterly, or an annual report, summarizes all this data and initiatives related to significant environmental aspects as identified through the project's EMS. These are reviewed by dedicated Metrolinx environmental staff to ensure the EMS is meeting its objectives. And we're also involved in EMS reviews, which contribute to the continuous improvement cycle of the EMS. Certain technological systems are being utilized, and consideration around mandating such systems is ongoing. If we can get all projects utilizing the same systems, it will ensure continuity of reporting and data across all projects. This has been particularly helpful for us with soil management and spill reporting tracking. We've also placed a great deal of emphasis on project turnover, ensuring that once projects are completed and all the relevant environmental assessments and reports are received and retained for record keeping and continuous improvement purposes. Now, one of the added benefits of having a prescribed EMS is that as per ISO 14001 requirements, there's a need to regularly assess the system, scope, and applicability, including a review of environmental activities, aspects, and impacts, which may adjust as the project proceeds through its work schedule. So often there's an opportunity to see for these adjustments to be made within the EMS outside of requirements of the structured contractual requirements that may take a longer period of time to reflect necessary changes. You can skip to the next slide. So most project agreements focus on several key environmental areas when it comes to construction and expansion of our network. Climate resiliency assessments have become commonplace as we continue to see increases in temperature and extreme weather events. Any projects with a capital cost of over $50 million must go through a climate risk and vulnerability assessment to ensure that what we're building is able to withstand future weather events. Soil, water, and waste contamination and management is also key, as nearly all projects involve substantial excavations in which we're dealing with excess soil, water tables, and generating general construction waste. On this note, we've worked tirelessly with contractors to ensure proper spill reporting, not just to government bodies, but also internally, all tracked using one system, allowing us to determine trends and set better controls for projects moving forward. There's also a software that we use to track all movement of soil away from our construction sites, again, providing that uniformity across our projects. As much of our construction occurs in densely packed residential areas, there are plenty of controls that need to be in place to manage construction noise, vibration, and air quality. This becomes a significant sticking point with our residential neighbors as we're looking to maintain good corporate citizenship, and we often go above and beyond in these areas. On occasion, there's also archaeological or cultural heritage requirements, as well as further assessments for endangered species or preservation of natural environment in environmentally sensitive areas. Lastly, various projects have also been tasked with calculating their greenhouse gas inventories, and as an organization, we continue to track and calculate our Scope 3 emissions. There's been tremendous work done completing our GHG inventory, focusing on Scope 1 and 2s, but with the help of these contractual requirements, we continue to work with our construction partners to further gather this information. Next slide, please. So there's two main barriers that exist from my perspective for embedding an EMS into our contract language: legacy contracts and budgetary constraints. Certain construction and expansion projects have been in existence for many years, and in some cases, such stringent environmental requirements may not have been present. While there's still references to an EMS, there could be concerns over updating of the language, which could trigger significant negotiations or legal considerations. In these instances, we've worked closely with our construction partners to embed any changes into the EMS through that continuous improvement cycle. We've been successful in many cases, especially with spills reporting requirements, which have been significantly enhanced over the last few years. From a budget perspective, there's always budgetary concerns to implementing a formal EMS, having dedicated staff, sometimes other voluntary environmental assessments that we require in the grand scheme of things. But we believe they're necessary, and through project scope assessments and determining the extent of the potential environmental risk, there are adjustments that can be made to environmental requirements to fit each and every project. Another factor that, of course, I'm sure everyone in the room is fully aware of is, the cost of environmental noncompliance or potential remediation should a significant environmental occurrence occur. Such penalties can be extreme and costly, not just in dollars, but also in organizational reputation. Some successes as a result of embedding the EMS requirements into our construction contracts include uniformity moving forward, enhanced environmental protection, and vastly improved reporting. Aligning contract language and utilizing a standard schedule template moving forward provides uniformity for future project works. With the enhancement of the environmental schedule, we can ensure improved environmental protection for various environmental aspects. And with the introduction of certain reporting software, we've been able to drive ease of access to the data on both the contractor and our side of operations, also allowing for various projects to use the same reporting system, particularly with soil management and spill response protocols. Next slide. So this does bring me to the end of my presentation. It's very high level based on the allotted time, but the benefits of driving EMS requirements through contractual obligations have been a significant step forward for Metrolinx in terms of environmental due diligence and also pushing continuous environmental improvements. Again, I thank you all for your time here today. Back to you, Katie.
Fantastic, James. Thank you so much. Thank you for all those examples there in terms of how ISO 14001 drives value in real operational context. That was fantastic. We're now going to briefly turn to conformity assessment and what the new edition means for adoption and assurance. And I'm pleased to welcome Howard Dawes, Global Training Technical Lead, Assessor and Tutor Academy at BSI Assurance, to take us through the next presentation. Howard, thank you for joining us. Over to you.
Thanks, Katie, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. And thank you, ISO, as well, for the opportunity for speaking today. My name's Howard Dawes, Global Training Technical Lead for Sustainability, Health, Safety and Wellbeing here at BSI. I've just got a short segment now just to cover off one practical question to make ourselves ready for 14001 2026. What is the difference between adopting the standard internally and going through that independent conformity assessment for certification? And why does that matter? So just to move on, a quick bit of context. For those of you who don't know, BSI supports organizations through standards and information solutions and through assurance services, such as system certification, internal and supplier audits, and also training. For today, the key point is that standards and conformity assessment work together. The standard provides the requirements for an effective management system, and conformity assessment provides the confidence, internally and externally, that those requirements are actually being met. So what does that mean? Why is that important? This matters, if you want to move on to the next slide, because 14001, as Susan mentioned at the top of this presentation, this is one of the most widely used environmental management system standards in the world. Based on the latest ISO survey, there are more than 600,000 organizations that are certified globally, covering more than 1 million sites. And the standard is used across a wide range of sectors, from construction, as we've just seen, and transport to chemicals, food, pharmaceuticals. That scale means that 14001 has become a common language that customers, regulators, investors, and supply chains recognize. So moving on, let's define the first route that organizations can take. And we'll move on to the next slide. Standard adoption, sometimes described as self-declared EMS. Here, the organization implements 14001 requirements internally and then evaluates its own conformity through self-assessment and internal audit. This can be flexible and cost-effective, and it clearly demonstrates intent and internal commitment, particularly for organizations building capability, piloting an EMS, or operating in markets where external certification isn't expected or perhaps required. The trade-off, of course, is external visibility. Without independent verification, recognition is often limited, and interested parties may ask how you have validated your claims. In other words, adoption can be excellent for strengthening internal control and performance, but it may not provide the level of external confidence that some stakeholders will be requiring. Now, moving on, Compare that with conformity assessment through independent certification. In this route, the EMS is audited by an accredited third-party formal certification is issued, and then surveillance and recertification audits provide ongoing checks and that the system remains effective and continues to meet requirements. The key difference then is credibility. Certification demonstrates externally validated performance and is widely recognized by regulators, customers, and supply chains. That's why I often summarize it like this: adoption builds a system, certification builds trust. It's important to say both approaches deliver value, but in different ways. Adoption provides that internal confidence. It helps you understand your environmental aspects, your risks and opportunities, the controls and performance, and embeds environmental management into day-to-day operations. Certification provides external confidence. It shows that those claims have been independently assessed. Commercial reality also drives that choice. Supply chains increasingly expect certification, and regulators and stakeholders tend to trust independent verification more readily than self-declaration. So my overall recommendation as part of today's launch of the standard is going to be balanced. Certification is not always mandatory, but it is often strategically advantageous. It's not just about doing the right things, it's also about being able to demonstrate them credibly. So let's move on to some practical steps now that the standard has been released. What should organizations do now that 14001-2026 has been launched? For those existing users, transition doesn't need or shouldn't need to feel overwhelming. Think of it as an evolution rather than a complete reset, and start early. So step one is to understand the changes, review the updated requirements, and identify what's new or revised. For example, areas that's been mentioned, such as climate, life cycle, and risk, so you know what needs attention. Step two is to conduct a gap assessment. Compare your current EMS against the revised requirements and prioritize the gaps that are high risk or high impact. The aim is to focus effort where it matters most. The next step, step three, is to update the EMS. Next slide. Revise the processes, documented information and controls where needed, and integrate the changes into business operations, not just into the documentation, i.e. the paperwork. Step four, build awareness and evidence of competence, train key roles, leadership, internal auditors, operational teams, so they understand the new expectations and can apply them consistently. Step five is to verify readiness. Conduct internal audits against the revised standards and address the non-conformities and weaknesses. And this is where you turn preparation into evidence. And step six is to engage your certification body. If certification is, of course, part of your strategic journey, plan the transition or recertification audit and align the timing with your certification cycle. Early engagement usually creates more options and a smoother transition. Across all 6 steps, keep one message in mind. Focus on integration, not just compliance or conformance. The most successful transition, or indeed adoption, are the ones that embed the changes into how the organization actually operates. So I'll close with a takeaway. Final slide. Whether you choose self-declaration or certification, and whether you're implementing for the first time of transitioning into 14001-2026, the goal is the same. A system that not only manages and aims to prevent negative environmental impacts, but also stands up to scrutiny and delivers environmental performance improvement. And that concludes my presentation. And thank you ever so much for listening and for your time. There was one more slide, I think, David. I'll pass back to Katie. Thanks ever so much.
Excellent, Howard. Thank you so much. I think that you answered a lot of questions that have already come through by registration and live as we've started the webinar. So we really appreciate your presentation into conformity assessment and standards adoption. I'll also take this opportunity to say, if you do have a question based on anything our speakers have already touched on, is an insight that's come to you that you'd really like one of our panelists to speak to at the end of the webinar when we have our Q&A session, please use the function at the top right-hand corner of the screen to submit a question. We're going to get through as many as we can after the presentations and after all our speakers have a chance to intervene. But now we're going to continue that practical lens, and we'll hear directly from a user perspective on how ISO 14001 translates into measurable outcomes in an organization. Julie Davidson is Head of Business Assurance at Jointline, and we're so glad to have you, Julie, to talk us through a customer's ISO 14001 impact journey. Over to you.
Thank you, Katie, for that introduction. It's an absolute honour to speak to you all today about our real-world experiences as to how 14001 has helped our specific business and the impactful influence that it continues to have on our day-to-day operations. I'll be sharing with you today some of the tangible impacts that the standard continues to have to the way that we as Jointline do business, and to try and share with you why we value it as a standard. The next slide, please. We are a medium-sized business. We're based in the UK. We've been operational since 1987. We've got 125 employees and we sit within the construction sector. We've held this standard since 2010, and it was the second ISO standard that my business introduced. We operate in a number of niche markets, and I'll briefly give you some of the context so that we know, so that you know a little bit about what we do. Next slide, please. If any of you have visited the UK and you've flown in, you will likely have experienced our work because we undertake a lot of line marking and ancillary services for a lot of the UK's largest airports, such as Heathrow or Edinburgh. We also undertake a lot of work on motorways. So the next slide will show you that if ever you've driven in the UK, you will likely have come across our work because we install all the lines for the major road networks within the country. Next slide, please. But it's not just roads and airfields that we work in. We undertake a lot of various off-highways works as well, so sports pitches like you can see. And if ever any of you have brought from any large distribution centres such as Amazon, you again will have been indirectly impacted by our works. Next slide. Finally, we do a lot of civil engineering work, particularly in the forestry sector, where we maintain a lot of the forests within the UK. So in the environmental aspect here in particular is really focused on by that client. And if we could move on, please, to why Jointline consider that ISO 14001 is more than just a piece of paper. It has played an absolutely fundamental role in helping us to achieve our organisational goals as a whole. Our vision is to be both an employer and a supplier of choice. And the introduction of 14001 as our environmental management system has been instrumental in making that mission statement a reality for us because of the way it strengthens our reputation and the trust that not just our clients, but also our staff place in us. Next slide, please. By embedding 14001 into our core business processes, it's given us a robust framework that's allowed us to both measure and monitor the impact of our works. It gives us a structured method for that real early identification of risk, and to therefore reduce it and hopefully exceed the expectations that our clients have of us. It really encourages us as well to continually improve the way that we deliver our works, and it leads us to foster those improved relationships, not just with our clients, but as has been mentioned before, also with our supply chain. So moving on, waste reduction is a real key part of this for us. And our strategy has really been to drive that waste downwards and to assess our waste streams rigorously. We don't want to send anything to landfill if we can help it. And we really work hard to reuse and reduce and recycle. For example, when we purchased road studs historically, they would come in single-use plastic. We worked hard with our suppliers because it's not as easy due to the weight to shift that. We've now developed, just for our business, reusable sleeves that they come in. We store them and they get returned to the supplier for reuse. And so many of the improvements that we've had have been collaborative efforts with our suppliers, and this way really help to contribute towards that circular economy. Next slide, please. We have seen tangible cost savings by implementing 14001 and managing, managing our environmental footprint through it really challenges us to use our resources effectively and save energy. So an example there might be a switch to LED lighting within our depots, push taps within our staff restrooms so that there's no water wastage. And it encourages us to be really creative in the way that we do business. So you may be able to see from the picture here, hopefully it's big enough for you to see, but that we've fitted solar panels onto the top of our work vans. And what we do, we capture this solar energy in a battery inside the vehicle, and we then can power our lighting and ancillary requirements within the vehicle when we're on site. Historically, we had to leave our engine idling to do this, where we needed flashing beacons, for example, on construction sites. And coming up with this new way of working means that we don't have to do that. So next slide, please. I apologise for my dry throat. The value that we draw from 14001 within Joint Line, though, it goes beyond operational gains, and it has directly supported our business growth. It has enabled us to secure much larger contracts than we had historically won. And we now work, for clients such as National Highways, who look after all the motorways in England. And like I've mentioned before, big clients such as Heathrow Airport, who place a huge emphasis on good environmental management. It opens doors for us, as the next slide will show. That competitive edge in today's marketplace is absolutely crucial for us, and a lot of these opportunities would be inaccessible if it weren't for having this good demonstration of how we do business. So the next slide will explain that we take a comprehensive approach within our business. We had a foundation of 9001, which is our quality standard, as you may know. And in 2010, we successfully integrated 14001. And since then, we have complemented those two with many other standards, such as 45001, 44001, collaborative business relationships, 39001 for road risk. So we take this really seriously. But 14001 gave us a wonderful base with which to bring in our latest standard of PAS 2080, which really focuses on carbon. And the setup that we had in place with 14001 enabled that to be a lot easier than it might otherwise have been. So in effect, it was helping us to future-proof our journey and the way forward. So getting towards the end of my presentation, and the next slide will try to explain that this really has been transformative to us. It's a way of thinking, and it provides us with that disciplined set of processes that we genuinely use daily as a business. It strengthens trust and it cements our position as a responsible employer. And because we've been raising the bar in the way that we utilise 14001 up to now, we feel confident that our senior managers are already involved and that this new edition of 14001 will be absolutely fine for us to implement. But it's not just a requirement, it's a responsibility for us to do it. So I will finish off there by saying thank you very much for listening. Hopefully some of you can reach out afterwards. It'd be lovely to connect, and handing back to you, Katie.
Absolutely brilliant, Julie. Thank you for your insights and what was a really strong illustration of impact in practice. It was great to hear from you. We're now going to zoom out slightly to look at the broader ISO 14000 family and how these standards work together. So I will invite Nadita Ramashala, Manager of the Standardization Division, Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards, to take us through exploring the ISO 14000 family of environmental standards. Great to have you, Nadita. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Katie. Good day, everyone. My name is Nadita Ramchala. I was recently appointed as a twin chair of ISO TC 207, and I'm happy to be part of today's session to speak about the ISO 14000 family of environmental standards. Next slide, please. The ISO TC 207 develops international standards that respond to global environmental challenges. We can see that this technical committee has a wide membership, 128 members, 77 published standards, and 18 standards are currently under development. These standards overall are practical tools that guide organizations in managing environmental responsibilities in a systematic and credible way. Some of the key committees or subcommittees under TC 207 include environmental management systems, environmental auditing and related practices, environmental labeling, environmental performance evaluation, life cycle assessment, and very importantly, greenhouse gas and climate change. Next slide, please. This slide speaks to how the ISO 14001 sits within the wider family of environmental management standards. At the center is the Environmental Management System Framework, so ISO 14001, and around it are the related standards that support organizations in areas such as understanding, context, internal auditing, monitoring and evaluation, emergency preparedness and response, operational planning and control, climate change adaptation, biodiversity, water resources, and waste. Also covered would be life cycle assessment, carbon footprint, environmental communication, and labels and declarations. The key message from this slide is that ISO 14001 provides the management system framework foundation, while the wider ISO 14000 family strengthens implementation in specific technical areas. For example, there's ISO 14002 Part 2 dealing with water under environmental aspects. And I would like to highlight that there's a forthcoming standard that deals with climate, ISO 14002 Part 3, as well as Part 4 dealing with resources and waste. Very importantly, you will see under operational planning and control the concept of eco-design and environmentally conscious design. We also have other supporting standards, for example, ISO 22320 dealing with emergency management, as well as biodiversity. So overall, the key message here is that there are many supporting standards that support EMS, and very importantly, monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation would be key to assessing the success of the EMS. So there's quantification and reporting of GHGs, and we will be hearing about natural carbon accounting for organizations as well. Next slide. We would have heard earlier how pervasive the ISO 14001 certification would have been from Howard. There is wide industry adoption, and it has been stated that over 63% of ISO 14001 certifications come from chemical, energy, and manufacturing sectors. We also have the 14,000 and standards supporting sustainability trends, and 48% of large enterprises plan to integrate sustainability focused standards into their operations. Additionally, there are a number of economic benefits, as we have heard before. These standards support regulated markets, they support policy and regulatory frameworks, and of course, lower capital costs and appealing to the more environmentally conscious society. Next slide. One of the key benefits of the ISO 14001 is that it can be aligned with other management systems, including quality, energy, occupational health and safety, and other related frameworks. This supports integrated management systems, allowing organizations to streamline processes, improve governance, and make more coherent decisions across different areas of performance. Some of the key aspects with the integrated management system, and of course ISO 9001 being the foundational standard, is that it supports addressing governance, risk and opportunities, compliance management, operational processes. And for those who are very familiar with the ISO standards, it is based on the Annex SL. So the common elements for these standards are shared across the management system. So it provides a very coherent and comprehensive way to manage the organization. It looks at the scope, risk, and opportunities. And also, a key aspect would be looking at cultural factors, risk treatment, as well as recognizing any gaps that exist and making improvements to the overall management system. Therefore, the ISO 14000 is well integrated into other management systems. It can even span ISO IC 27000 series, looking at information security, also business continuity management. There's no limit in terms of the integration. So next slide. One of the key initiatives under ISO TC 207 would be the developing country engagement strategy. And this is focused on encouraging developing countries to participate in international standardization and to ensure that the perspectives and needs of developing countries are reflected in the development of international standards for the environment. The overall importance of outreach and engagement cannot be underscored. We have a number of strategies within the developing country engagement document, looking at training, facilitating communities of practice, developing case studies and application tools, also workshops with policy through the ISO members or the national standards bodies, and enhancing communication strategies using digital platforms. Next slide, please. I would just like to highlight some of the key upcoming standards under the purview of ISO TC 207. There is, first off, on climate guidelines for using the 14001 to address climate-related environmental aspects and conditions. This standard is actually in FDIS, so it is very close to finalization and publication. There's also 14025 looking at environmental product declarations, and that covers environmental statements and programs for products, and again FDIS, so very close to completion. We also have a draft international standard addressing resources and waste guidelines for using the ISO 14001 to address resources, circularity, and waste-related environmental aspects. And finally, at the committee stage or CD, we have CD 14060. looking at net zero aligned organizations. And this is very significant. There has been a lot of discussion around net zero internationally. This international standard will provide the framework for organizations aligning governance, strategy, and action with net zero objectives. Next slide, please. In terms of closing, and this is my final slide, I wanted to highlight that one of these very significant initiatives of ISO TC 207 is around youth leadership, and it helps bridge the gap between young professionals and the work of international standards. We also have the Developing Country Engagement Strategy, which I highlighted before, and I encourage everyone to take a look at the work of ISO TC on its website. So as I close, special thanks to ISO Standards Council of Canada for the twinning arrangement, as well as BSI for hosting the workshop, and thank you, Katie. So back to you.
Fantastic, Nadita, and thanks to you for such a comprehensive presentation. That was fantastic. Building on that, we'll now explore how the ISO 14000 family connects with other standards, particularly in areas like natural capital and wider environmental decision making. So we have our final two speakers for the webinar before we hit our Q&A section. Ece Ozdemiroglu, Chair of BSI Technical Subcommittee SES18, Assessing and Valuing Natural Capital, and CEO of FTech, and Stephanie Heim, Project Lead of ISO 14054 2025, member of SES18, and CEO of Little Blue Research Limited. Great to have you both, and I'll hand over to you, Stephanie. Thanks a lot.
Actually, to Ece first.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you for the opportunity. We are as 14 quarters of 14,054, very happy to be in the 14,000 family. As Susan Taylor Martin said at the beginning, the environmental management is the responsibility of the whole organization, not just the environment, health and safety, sustainability or regulations department. And the whole organization needs to get to grips with a lot of complex information about its activities, its impacts, dependencies on nature. And as the fundamental overarching standard, 14001 is relevant to all organizations and all impacts and dependencies for that reason. It offers a holistic look to organizations. It can produce information and data that can be used in different contexts. And it most importantly, including for the two standards that we're going to highlight, it creates a discipline of linking an organization's activities, products, services to its environmental conditions, aspects, impacts, and dependencies. Terminology may differ because we're dealing with different types of impacts and very complex natural environment, but principles are common. And it's great to be able to demonstrate these with the two examples that Nadita Ramachala already mentioned. In the next slide, you'll see 14,054, the one that we worked on, which aims to, I think we skipped one. Thank you. The 14,054 aims to prepare natural capital accounts for all sorts of organizations in all sorts of sectors, and also, should the organization wishes, to include the impacts and dependencies of its value chain too. It brings, the standard helps organizations to bring together environmental, financial, socioeconomic information from the organization's own collection and also from the literature, and presents it in a financial format similar to financial accounting. ISO 17298 focuses on biodiversity, its conservation, ecological restoration, and sustainable use of resources into the business, social, and environmental strategies and practices of an organization. Its focus on biodiversity impacts and dependencies, risks, and opportunities also help define, implement, and monitor action plans for organizations. Both use the information 14,001 helps collect, and both can be applied at all organization sectors and all scales. And Stephanie is going to give some more detail on each in the next couple of slides.
So if we could just move to the next slide, please. Thank you, Eddie. And thinking about that again, I think we've skipped forward a slide. So can we go back one? Thank you very much. To the commonalities between ISO standards. So if we think of our two example standards and also 14001, there are some key underpinning commonalities. To start with, aligning with key definitions across the standards. As Ajay mentioned, some of those can be tweaked based on the audience that a standard is particularly trying to engage with. But the underpinning definitions are aligned. In addition, those example standards also talk about their relationship with ISO 14001, but also allow to be implemented as a standalone topic. They both provide more detail about specific topics, in this case, natural capital and biodiversity. And coming back to something mentioned by a few presenters at the top of this webinar, that life cycle perspective, it runs through both of these standards, and as a result really helps with things like TNFD, Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure recommendation implementation. So if we go to the next slide, please, what I've done is just taken out 3 examples of the sort of complementarity between this standard, natural capital accounting for organisations, and 14001. And here we're looking at the first point, that the EMS is often identified as a source for the data that 14054 relies on. And that's particularly in relation to environmental aspects because of the organisation's activities, products or services which are captured within that EMS. And we need those. If we're implementing 14054, that's information that's needed to go on to produce natural capital accounts. There's also an underpinning aim here within 14054, which is helping companies integrate environmental considerations into their processes and business decisions. And that aim aligns completely with that of 14001. So if we go to the next slide, please. Oh, I think we've skipped over another one. Could we go back to ISO 17298, please? Thank you very much. So if we look at this standard on biodiversity, here we're seeing the link between the ISO 14001 and the requirements for environmental policy. And this particular standard on biodiversity really looks at where biodiversity actions can be added or integrated into that environmental policy. So upping that granular detail on this particular topic. It also specifies monitoring and measurement and analysis and evaluation of biodiversity, which again would be captured in our environmental management system. I'm going to then ask us to go to the last slide and hand back to Eddie.
Yes, and in the interest of time, I just want to summarize this slide in a couple of sentences. Why do we want to use any of these standards, and why do we want to use them in combination with each other? Is to ensure that our environmental and financial management are efficient and effective. We are increasingly seeing nature as a financial issue, financial risk issue, and we can use these standards to support those discussions, support the decisions with the information collected and analytical discipline the standards introduce, and ensure that the information collected is relevant and useful for decision making. You can see on the slide that within the 14001 overarching system, with the focus of 17,298 on biodiversity and 1454 on pulling it all together in an accounting format, we are seeing already increasing examples of doing just that, answering for our clients the so what question. We know our environmental impacts and dependencies. What do we do with that information? And Godspeed, as they say, to us all.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. And thanks for wrapping up your presentation very nicely in a nice little bow there, Ece. That was fantastic. Thank you to all of our speakers. Actually, I'll invite all of them to come back on camera right now as we move into our Q&A. We do have under 10 minutes of the webinar to go. And I'm very aware that we've collated a lot of questions. So we've tried to categorize these by the most common ones that we've seen filter through, and we'll try and get through as many as we can in the next few minutes. Andrew, the first question I'll throw to you, this was quite common, hence I'm bringing it forward front and center. Will organizations need to change their EMS? If you could speak to that, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the question. From my perspective, I think organizations will need to consider the revision issues that we've raised during this webinar. As Susan Taylor Martin said, the Chief Executive of BSI, it's taken us 30 years to get to where we are with ISO 14001:2026. So it's more of an evolution rather than a revolution. However, many organisations will need to take into account their own individual circumstances. For many, I think they will make a smooth and quick transition between the 2015 and the 2026 edition. But for others, I think to give them confidence about that smooth transition, it would be prudent to carry out a gap analysis between the requirements from 14,001/2026 and their current environmental management system. And that will give them the confidence to know where they meet those new requirements, and if there are some areas where they need to backfill in elements of their management system, then they'll be able to manage that more effectively, and that will give them that smooth transition that I guess we all wish for users of 14,001.
Excellent, great points and great advice for organizations out there. That was fantastic. The next sort of most common themed question I'll pose to you, Howard, will existing ISO 14001:2015 certificates remain valid after ISO 14001:2026 is published?
Thanks, Katie. There's a nice, neat, short answer to that. Yes. But I can expand on that. Yeah, all organizations are going to be at some partway through their existing certification cycle. So indeed, some organizations may have only been certified to 2015, 6 months ago, within the last 12 months. Equally, there could be those that are due for recertification in 12 months, 18 months in the future. So we're all in different places. Technically, the actual transition period is likely, I think we're still waiting for absolute confirmation from Global ACI, but we expect that to be 3 years as a typical kind of transition period. So let's say an organization certified last week, they've got 3 years. That's how long. But I think the in short message will be to speak to your certification body and discuss with them the speed at which you want to transition, because I think some of the certification bodies may be able to offer a quick single audit from a certification point of view and research, or the other probably more progressive approach you might say will be to actually include the new requirements in existing certification activity through surveillance visits, and then you'll be certified to the new standard at your next certification.
Fantastic, excellent. I'm going to be brave and squeeze in one more question for you, Amajit, if you can fit in your response, hopefully in 30 to 45 seconds. How does ISO 14001:2026 address climate change, biodiversity, and resource availability? We heard a little bit about this in the webinar, but maybe just a quick reaction from you in answering that question.
Well, this is not something new. 14,001 has been established to allow organizations to identify and address significant environmental impacts. And I would argue climate change, biodiversity impacts, and all that I've mentioned earlier on could be significant environmental impacts. So it's not anything new. It's just that now you would see these words appearing explicitly in the clause on context. So the good news is that by making it more explicit, organizations would be almost, forced to think about these issues and take them into account within the larger landscape, as what I had explained earlier on all the pressures and stakeholder expectations out there. And I think there's enough push factor for organizations to think about this more seriously and address these through their EMSs. And I'm very positive and I'm very happy with the outcome of the standard. And I can see that it will definitely help organizations address these current and future issues.
Absolutely fantastic. And thank you for the brief answer. That is all the time that we have for questions. Thank you to all of our speakers today for your comprehensive and very detailed presentations. As we said, the session is being recorded, so you will receive a copy. And it is now time to move to our closing remarks. So I'll first hand over to Vanessa McCorkadale from BSI to take us out of this webinar. Vanessa, over to you.
Thank you so much, Katie, and thank you to everyone who's joined us today. It's been a fantastic discussion and a great opportunity to reflect the continued importance of ISO 14001 and the value that this new edition will bring as well. So what we've heard today, just in summary, is some examples from Julie and James in that 14001 reinforces something fundamental, that environmental management is no longer a standalone function within organizations. It's become integral to how organizations operate, make decisions, and create long-term value for themselves and others. We also heard from Howard that 2026 edition builds on an already strong and widely adopted foundation. We heard from Amarjit and Andrew that it makes that the standard is clearer, more accessible, and better aligned with today's environmental priorities. Highlighted also by Nadita, Steph, and Eche, it sits within a broader ecosystem of standards that together help organizations take a broader, more holistic and structured approach to environmental sustainability. So I'll finish with saying that as BSI, we are so proud to support the development and application of all of these standards you've heard today. As the climate crisis and biodiversity loss, extreme weather events continue, we know it's imperative that we all continue to act together and affect these changes that allow everyone living now, as well as those in the future, to thrive. Global commitments like the London Declaration and standards like ISO 14001 play a vital role to bring us all along together to tackle these challenges. And we're so proud to work with ISO and experts around the world. Thank you again. I'll hand over to Katie. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Vanessa. Again, thank you to all of our speakers today and everyone who's joined us for this webinar. We really hope that the session has given you a very clear understanding of the new edition of ISO 14001, as well as practical insight into how it can be applied. If you would like more information on ISO 14001, you can head to the website of the ISO member in your country, which is BSI if you're in the UK, or head to iso.org. Thank you again for your time. We look forward to continuing to engage with you, and we wish you a great rest of the day. Bye for now.